to welcome everyone to another ACCU London meeting. I know some of you are new here, so I'll stop at the front if you want to have a look at it. We used to be the Association of C and C++ Users, now we're just all kinds of development. And there's also a schedule of our future meetings. If you didn't get one last month, it's over there. Next month we've got somebody from Microsoft talking about new stuff in .NET. But for the moment, we've got David, and a lot of our, yeah, he's not up to Microsoft standards. A lot of our regulars working around the city, and they kind of go, what's this quant stuff, this fancy stuff? And so we thought, we should get a talk on, what is quantitative development and why is it different and all that. And we thought of David, who's an ACCU member, and started doing quantitative development not that long ago. So hopefully he won't get to the rocket science at least about the 20th minute or something like that. At least some of us will stay with it for the first bit. Well, hopefully we'll get one or two more top talks on this similar related subjects over the coming year. Andrew's promised us one on value at risk later in the year, so it's going to start something. But I'll hand over to David now and give him the microphone.
Yes, thank you, Alan. Okay, so what I'd like to do just to begin with is just a couple of plugs here, actually. Hello, question already? Right, I shall speak up. Right, okay, sorry, thank you. What I'd just like to do to start with, once I can get this to go down here, is to just make some plugs here, because we're sort of two halves here. First of all, I'd like to thank Seven City very much for providing the rooms for us for our London ACCU meetings, because we're a non-profit organisation. We don't have any funds. We certainly don't have any buildings or anything. So we rely on the goodness of other people like Seven City to give us the use of their rooms and stuff. So it's we very much appreciate that support. Seven City is a fantastic organisation, training organisation for finance. It has a great pioneering course called the Certificate in Quantitative Finance, which is a very unique course for a lot of reasons, and I can talk about that towards the end. So if you are thinking about sort of getting into this area, I strongly recommend you have a look at those guys, i.e. the building that we're standing in here. Then on the other side of the coin, there'll be some people here from who will have done the CQF. I can at least see about 3 or 4 people. In fact, can we have a show of hands? Hands up who's done the CQF, or maybe thinking about doing it or doing it. There you go. So there's roughly half the people in this room have either done it or are doing it. And then the other half are the people from the ACCU. And as Alan said, the ACCU is a programmers organisation that to do is to improve people's programming skills and to provide forums and so on and so forth for people to come together and discuss good programming practices. So if you are in the quant field and you're from Seven City and you're thinking about improving your programming skills or maybe entering into that area, then I would strongly recommend you have a look at the ACCU, because I think by joining that you would instantly, not instantly, but you would, over time, you would improve your programming. It's certainly helped my programming skills, and there's a lot of very, very clever and knowledgeable people in the ACCU who, if you don't know the answer or whoever you're chatting to doesn't, there will be someone in the ACCU who does. And finally, I'd like to thank Merrill Lynch, who basically took me on as a quant developer a year ago. And to get that first job is the hardest step when you're changing careers. And a change into quant work is very much different to working in IT. So I'd like very much to thank them. And they're behind me as far as this talk goes, and they've given me a few ideas and things. So, and they're a very, very good employer. So if you're looking for jobs, talk to me. Okay, so without further ado, let's go on. Before I go to the next slide, what I'd just like to say is that because there's 2 groups here, I've made this talk accessible to everybody. So I know Ralph here, sorry to single you out, you said you didn't know anything about this at all. Well, that's perfect, because I've geared this for people who don't know anything. Now, that might be a bit frustrating for the CQF guys, but I have put things in there that CQF guys will like as well. So bear with me while I go over the really kind of primary school quant stuff, and then we'll get into some more fancy stuff later on. But hopefully by that time people will be kind of on the same page and we'll know roughly what's going on. So, without further ado, let's get going. Okay, so first of all, what is quantitative development? Well, to answer that question, we really need to answer the question, what is quantitative finance? And to answer that question, we've got to really go back in time, really, and look at the history of the market, or markets, I should say, plural, and see what's happened there, really. I want to spend a little bit of time on this, not too much, but maybe 15 to 20 minutes going over this and exploring this idea, because it's an area that isn't really dealt with very much, is the history of options and derivatives and all that kind of stuff. But it's really very fundamental, and it's very, very interesting. So let's do that. So what we're going to cover is forwards, tulip options trading in the Netherlands in 1630. A French guy called Louis Jean-Baptiste Alphonse Bachelier, an American called Ed Thorpe, and 3 other Americans called Black and Scholes, and another guy called Merton, who seems to be forgotten. And then we're going to ask, what are options? Okay, so the first thing to define is forwards. Now, forwards are the most basic financial instrument, and they probably predate money itself, because a forward is simply an agreement to do something in the future. So you pay some money and something happens in the future. It's a separation of the payment from the exchange of the asset or the service that you've paid for. So everybody in this room has entered into some forward contract or other in the time. If anybody who's in this room has paid for something and then something happens later, that's a forward contract. Has anybody ordered anything from Amazon and it's taken a long time to come? So the money leaves your bank account, nothing comes on your doorstep, that's a forward contract, okay? A forward contract is the most simple derivative. That is, it derives its value from something else. It's the most basic thing, and it still keeps many markets alive today. So, for instance, the commodity markets are driven by instruments called futures, and futures are basically forwards. They're standardized future contracts. And, you know, if you look at all the commodities in this room, coffee that comes out of that machine will have been bought with a future contract, probably. And all metals and soybean and all the rest of it, oil, etc., etc. That's basically forwards at the heart of those markets. It's the lifeblood of those markets. Okay, so first of all, let's start defining what we mean by options. Okay. Options are one type of financial instrument which are collectively called derivatives. A derivative is any financial contract whose value derives from something else. The something else is called the underlying. A classic example is the call option. This gives the holder of the option the right to buy the underlying at a prearranged strike price. So a very simple example is, you might say, well, I sell Alan here the right to buy from me a barrel of oil for $150 in 3 months' time. Okay, so what's the price of oil today? Does anybody know? The peak was 135, but I think it backed down 133. So in 3 months' time, let's say the market's dropped to 100. You've got a bit of paper that says, I've got the right to buy this barrel of oil for 150. But the market's 100. What are you going to do? How much is the piece of paper worth? Exactly. It's not even worth the ink and the paper it's printed on. It's not worth nothing at all. On the other hand, if the market's risen to 200, as one of the analysts in Goldman Sachs believes it's going to do, or certainly by the end of the year, then that piece of paper is worth a bit more. So how much is it worth? Let's see, what did I say? 50 minus 35. 135. Well, that's the current price. So we struck at 100. Oh no, yeah, sorry, no, yeah, 50. So we struck at 150, right? Yeah. So it raises to 200. Yeah, sorry, yeah. So it's does everybody kind of understand that? I mean, I'm sure the CQF guys are kind of yawning at this point. You can watch the cricket, but it's finished. Sorry. Do the ACCU guys kind of hook into that kind of idea? Derivatives are effectively just agreements. That's all they are. They're, you know, in the old days they used to be pieces of paper. Nowadays they're actually done electronically, although still a lot of term sheets are produced out of actual pieces of paper. But that's all they are. They're just contracts. They're agreements between two legally binding people, a legally binding agreement between two people or two counterparties. Okay, so enough of the waffle. Let's have a look at a picture. Okay, so here was our, I don't know what that strike price is. Oh, the numbers haven't come out very well. That's not good. Oh, but you'll have to believe me that that's 100 down there. So I hope you can all see this pointer here. Where that K is, that's the strike price, and that's 100. In my example I gave before, it was 150, but this is 100, let's say. So what happens is when the underlying increases, the price of the option, which is this thing on the vertical scale, it goes up, because we're basically, they call this area in the money. So this represents the point at which you start making a profit. And in mathematics, basically, you've got the call payoff is the max of the spot price represented by S and the strike. So in our example, the spot price would be 200, the strike would be 150, so we'd get max of 50 and 0. The maximum of 50 and 0 is 50, so our payoff would be 50 at that point. There's not really much more to say about this kind of graph, other than the value of this is at expiry. It's not now. And this is the key question. What is the value of a call now, today? This is the value at expiry when we come to settle up in 3 months' time. We say, right, well, what's this piece of paper worth? It's easy. It's a very, very simple sum. It's that. The question is, what's the value now? What are the factors that affect the pricing of that derivative now? Because it's effectively, it's a bet. It's a bet on the market. And if you know much about sort of gambling and games, you know that there's quite a lot of probability theory in gambling and games. So this is the kind of realm that sort of quantitative finance gets into, and I'll go a little bit more into that in the future, in the near future. Yeah, no, it's an obligatory forward. Yeah. So what I can only do tonight is really skim the surface of this theory, basically, because some of it's very, very deep and demands a lot of high-level maths, which I'm not going to do. Which some people will be relieved with, some people might be disappointed. But anyway, let's go on. So where did all this come from, this call option and stuff? Well, the first recorded example of a call, of a call option, was, I believe, in 1630. I don't know of an earlier one. And what happened is that there was this bright spark called Busberg, who was the ambassador to the Netherlands government, and he was working in Istanbul, and he came across these beautiful flowers called tulips. And tulips weren't in Europe at that time, so he brought some of the tulips back, and people went absolutely wild over them. So much so that the demand rocketed and the price rocketed. And at one point, the price was so much, it was 6,000 guilders, which is 50,000 euros in today's money, for one tulip. So that gives you an idea of this is cited as the first economic bubble that ever happened. And basically, what happened is, my next slide shows, I don't know if you've all had enough time to read that, but there's quite a lot of background material there. But what happened is that this was a time when the 30 Years' War was raging in Europe, and the price surged really high. The 30 Years' War sort of kicked in. There was a few major battles in Germany, and then the price dropped savagely. And what happened is there was a whole section of the markets that were devoted to tulip trading, and they were trading forwards on tulips. So that instead of buying tulips on the spot market, on the immediate market, they were saying, right, well, we want to guarantee delivery from my tulips. So they would go to somebody who was growing tulips and say, right, grow me 100 tulips. Here's a bit of paper. I will pay you. Here's the money. I will pay you. Or they'll either settle up there and then, or they'd settle at expiry. But then what happened, of course, the price dropped, and there was all these people holding forwards that said that they were going to buy the tulips at this really high price, but the price had crashed because of the 30 Years' War. So what these wealthy people in Holland did, they basically went to the government and they changed all the market rules. And the government overnight said, right, the forwards are not forwards. They don't oblige the holder to settle up and pay for the tulips. It gives you the option to do that. And if you want to get out of the contract, you can pay a small fee, which is 3.5% of the notional, the notional value of the contract, to get out of it. And they effectively created the first options market overnight. And there's a very interesting paper by a chap called Earl Thompson and Jonathan Tressard, which goes into all of this with great detail. And that paragraph there underneath the web address for this paper just basically says what I just said. So if you want to read more about that, it's a really good paper, really interesting. By the way, if anybody's got any questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. I've got quite a lot to go through, so I'm going to speed up, I think. Okay, and then basically after that, there's not much that went on as far as derivatives trading was concerned. I think there were some derivatives trading in Chicago with futures back in the 19th century. But after that, certainly as far as the theory of the pricing of these things was concerned, there wasn't a lot going on. The basic problem is called the option pricing problem. Is what do you charge somebody for the option? If I was to sell Alan a call option, how much would I charge him for it? What's the fair price for that option? So what are the assumptions that I need to make in order to charge him the fair value? I can't just put my finger in the air and say, 10% of the whatever it is. So if it was that call on a barrel of oil, I wouldn't just say, it's $15 or whatever. I'd have to come up with some way of dealing with this. And basically, this is what Bachelier, this Frenchman, started doing. He started to actually try to analytically say, what is the fair price for an option? What do we need to do in order to, what assumptions do we need to make, and what mathematics do we need to do to come up with a fair value? What makes sense? And one of the two driving things that really determine the fair price. One is that your presumption that your underlying is not of constant value. So we all know that prices are jumping around from day to day, and that's a natural consequence of individuals doing lots of different things. And if we were all doing exactly the same thing every day, then prices would probably be constant. But it's because things are being bought and sold in different quantities, and societies are growing and China's growing and all the rest of it, but things are moving around. So it's natural that your underlyings are bouncing around in a random fashion. The other thing is something called hedging. I don't know how much time I'm going to have to go into that, but that's basically the idea there, is that if I sell Alan a call option on a barrel of oil, when the time comes, he might exercise. He might not, but he might exercise. And if he exercises his option, I better have some oil for him. Otherwise, he's not going to be very happy. Right? So the idea of hedging is that you've got to hold a certain quantity of the underlying. The actual amount that you hold is the key, and then we're going to see that in a minute. That is the pricing problem, is how much of that underlying you hold. That determines the price more than anything. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so what do quants do? Well, quants basically determine the fair price of derivatives. That's, if you wanted to sort of summarize roughly what quants do, that's what they do. So in order to do that, they need to categorize and model the amount of randomness that is displayed by the underlying commodity, asset, security, whatever it is, whatever is underneath that financial contract. So that's what quants start to do when they first have some kind of pricing problem. So what I've done is just to pull out a few examples of this from real data, and it might be quite an interesting exercise for people in the audience here to see if they can guess what these things are. So I'll give you some clues here. This one starts in 1928, although I know that the data went back at least 20 years before that, maybe to about 1900, and it goes up to present time. I mean, that says 2004, but actually there's still data today. This thing is still going, as it were. Correct. That's the Dow Jones Index. Dow Jones Index is made up of X number of companies in the US. Can anybody tell me how many companies it is? No? 30. Yeah, I think that's about right. Okay, so full marks. So that's the Dow Jones. So how would we model that? Well, that's how we would model that. Now I am going to throw some maths in here, otherwise the CQF guys are going to get tremendously bored. But in order to make this accessible, I've made the maths hopefully as simple as possible. This is where I'm going to start writing on the screen due to this fantastic technology. This term here is an increment of the spot price. So if I can write that, increment of spot. Actually, there's a mistake in this. There should be S in there. Never mind. This is the drift parameter, and this is the volatility parameter. Drift and volatility, you can think of it as somebody throwing a stick into a river. The drift is like the drift that will take the stick downstream. The volatility is the amount of randomness perhaps going across the stream that the stick takes. And if you've done any, people here, if you've done any sort of physics or engineering or even biology, you will have studied kind of diffusion processes. And this is an example of a diffusion process. This term here, if we only had this term, this is effectively Brownian motion. X is just a random increment. It's effectively a draw from a normal variate. So it's effectively a draw from N01. sigma here is the volatility parameter, which in this case could be a constant. It could be a process. S could be a function of time. More often than not in advanced modeling, it is a function of time. And so could mu be. Mu could be a function of time, although it's normally constant. But this is a very, obviously, there's things lacking with this model. What's lacking with it? Well, let's say if mu was constant, then it wouldn't do this. It would probably do something more like this. But here we've got some sort of exponential growth. That's true. That's probably yeah, because I left that out. Yeah. Well spotted. Okay. So next one. Where's this one from? If anybody works in this area and knows what that is, don't say. Don't spoil the fun. Yes, sorry. I've got a colleague of mine to do this in MATLAB, and we did it rather quickly, and we fiddled around trying to get the scale out properly to display dates, but it was going to take too long, so I just said, just give it to me. That's about 2 years worth of data, or maybe a year and a half. No, it's not oil. Oil's far more stable than that. This is a crazy, crazy market. Sorry? I think that's, to tell you the truth, I don't know. That's going to be price, basically. It's going to be some numeraire. It's going to be, I can't really tell you the answer because then that'll tell you what it is. Yes, it's physical, yeah. So you see, what's happening is that we're bumbling around here, but then suddenly it shoots up. We've got these really high peaks, and there's an absolutely enormous one here. Okay, that's about 18 months to 2 years, yeah. Sorry? Is it? Oh, no. I mean, of course it's not fixed volatility. Look, I mean, that's not fixed vol. I mean, sorry. Oh, VIX, right, sorry. No, it's not, sorry, I don't know your name. Arvin, he's asked, just for distance people, the question was asked whether this was the VIX, and the VIX is a volatility index, which is a measurement of the volatility of X number of equities. Yes, it is a power price graph, yeah. No? It's electricity. Well done. Right, okay, eventually we got there. Right. Well, there's various graphs for electricity, so you may not have come up with it or seen it before. What happens is sometimes there's great demand coupled with tightness in the system, i.e. there isn't much electricity to spare, and suddenly people can charge what they like for electricity, and that's what happens. You know, when I don't know what these peaks would correspond to. I'd have to go back and find out, but it might be when the World Cup's on and everybody switches on the telly or something, but it's probably not that, but it's probably it's those kind of things. It's extreme demand coupled with extreme lack of supply. They kind of build in expectation for that kind of thing. It's unexpected. I think it's more unexpected events really that really ramp the price up suddenly. Could be a heat wave with yes, yeah. There's these kind of things, or there's these big interconnects that distribute electricity. If one of those goes down, then you know that can affect things. Anyway, along the top is another. This time I didn't forget the S because what I've done, I've actually put the S in over here. I've divided through by S, and S has gone over there. And when you see ds over S, that means the return on the underlying, because it's the increment over the price, which is the return. So here we've got dt, we've got a dx, and unfortunately something's dropped off this slide because it was converted from. Oops. It was converted from an old version of, a new version of PowerPoint. So there's a DQ here, which is the jump. So we've got this bit which represents the drift. We've got this bit which represents the volatility, and we've got this bit which represents these spikes. So this is drift, vol, and spikes. Sorry. Right, J is the size of the jump, and that can be fixed, but it obviously isn't fixed in this case. It's random. And then these parameters in here, the kappa is the strength of the mean reversion. So what happens is that the mean reversion basically means that you've got, I'll draw it so people who are watching remotely or recorded will see what I'm drawing. This line here is effectively the mean. Maybe do it in a different color, try to do that. That's the mean, that yellow line there. And so this parameter kappa will define how quickly, after a jump, the price reverts back to that mean level. So that's mean reversion, or mean reversion strength. And then lambda is the intensity, i.e. the number of jumps. And K is the size related to the size of the jumps. This is taking longer than I anticipated, but it doesn't matter, it's all interesting stuff. Yeah, and sigma's the vol. So there you go. That's pretty much a realistic model for this market. You'd have to calibrate it. You'd have to get the right kappa, the right K, the right lambda, the right distribution for J. K is some other kind of scaling factor. I've got some notes. I actually got a reference for this model. If you want to, mail me afterwards if you want. I've got a reference for it. We'll talk a bit more about it. Okay. That's right. That's what I'm saying here. Ah, right. No, there isn't. There isn't. And you wouldn't really want that because this formula would be just too big and unwieldy. You know, it would be like the Swiss Army knife of, you know, the Swiss Army knife they do this model which is about this wide, and it has everything in it. But the point is you can't hold it properly. What I'm saying here, though, is that the model before, sorry, get this thing to go up. There, we'll do that. This model is an unrealistic model. It's just a toy model just to get you into the idea of, this is called a stochastic differential equation. If anybody here has done physics, they'll know about PDEs, partial differential equations. This is very, very similar to a PDE, but it's got a random term in it, which does all sorts of weird and wonderful things to the maths. So this was just to give you an insight into SDEs, as they're called, stochastic differential equations. So I'm saying that's a toy model. What I'm saying though is that is a real model that could be used to model electricity prices. It comes out of a book that's dealing with the energy markets. Okay, one more. You're right. You're right about electricity again. Sorry for going on about electricity. I'm not sure if it's forward. I think it's spot, because the times along the bottom, I don't know if it's clear. but this is 4:30 a.m. in the morning, and so is this. That's 4:30. So this is an intraday electricity price. So it's nobody using electricity in the morning, 4:30. Nobody using it in the next morning at 4:30. And so we got this basic sine wave shape. So that's probably the wrong colour. Anyway, there's enough colours on there. So we could model that, funnily enough, with a sine term in here. So omega would probably be pi. I think I worked that out if t was going between 0 and 1 for one day. And so you can see basically how that works. This is another way of thinking about these equations, that this is the deterministic part. And this is the random part. Or stochastic is another posh name for random. So the deterministic part looks like a sine wave. Now a sine wave looks like this. Let me get this right now. And if we take the absolute value of the sine wave, it's going to look like this. Because this bit gets reflected up there. So here would be, this would be one day, this would be Monday, and this would be Tuesday, and so on. This is just to give you an idea about how models are developed to model underlying instruments. Most of the models are come from research papers. However, research papers only present models in a very academic way. They'll tell you how to get a price out of the model. They won't tell you how to get the Greeks out of it, which we'll talk about in a minute. We'll talk about what Greeks are. They won't tell you how to calibrate it. They won't tell you how it fits into your correlation framework. They won't tell you how to, maybe it only deals with one asset, but you've got a basket of assets. There's all these kind of strange effects that go on that academics don't address. And that's what real-world quants do. They take research papers and they basically make them work, make them actual working models. Because, you know, a research paper will deal with that much of the problem, whereas real-world quants have to deal with the whole thing. Okay. Right, I'm just going to use this. So, going back to this option pricing problem, coming up with a fair price of an option. Bachelier started it with his thesis in 1900, the French chap. And he was one of the first people to actually say, right, well, this underlying process is random. It is a Brownian motion. And what does that mean? How does that affect us? And he came up with a formula which is pretty simple. And it was quite close to what the Americans actually cracked about 70 years after that in the late 60s and early 70s. And there were a bunch of mathematicians, and Ed Thorpe was one of them, who actually worked on this problem. Ed Thorpe's a really, really interesting character, and you can read about him on Wikipedia and online. And some notable things about him: he was the inventor of blackjack card counting. He wrote a book called Beat the Dealer, which was, I think it's sold 1 million copies or something ridiculous. It tells you how to count cards of blackjack. And I think he invented the first wearable computer so that he could then go into casinos and monitor the roulette table, enter all the outcomes of all the spins, or whatever they call it, into this portable computer, and the portable computer would then tell him the bias on the table. Because with any roulette table, well, maybe in those days, perhaps not now, but there was a very, very slight bias, and he could exploit that and win. So he won at roulette as well. But I suppose most notably, he worked with, for us anyway, tonight, he worked with a guy called Shim Kassouf on this thing called delta hedging. And delta hedging is very basically, it's holding a certain amount of that underlying, holding a certain amount of that barrel of oil, so that when the maturity comes and we're exposed to people exercising their option, we've got the oil to give them. Or if it's a put option, we've shorted the oil. But we won't go into that because that might confuse some of the programmers in the room. You can read all about that kind of stuff later on. Okay, so then these three guys came along, and these are probably names that you may recognise because these are Nobel Prize winners. Myron Scholes and Robert Merton, they won the Nobel Prize for their work on this problem. And they came up with a set of formulas that other people had also come up with as well. Very, very, very similar formulas. But they won the Nobel Prize for the way in which they came up with a formula. And their formula was this continuous delta hedging methodology. So on the left we have Myron Scholes. There he is on the left of the slide and on the left of this picture. And he's shaking hands with the King of Sweden, receiving his whatever they call it, Nobel laureate or Nobel Prize or whatever. And Robert Merton and Fisher Black. Fisher Black died before the Nobel Prize was awarded. So in some ways, the formula really should be called the Scholes-Merton formula, although it's called the Black-Scholes formula. There's some people who call it the Black-Scholes-Merton formula. I've always called it the Black-Scholes formula, so I can't get out of the habit of that. And I'm not sure why it isn't called the Black-Scholes-Merton. Maybe it's just too long or whatever. If anybody knows, please let me know. They published the paper. Right. So that's a very simple reason. But Merton did a lot of work with them, and he helped them develop it later on. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the two answers from the audience here are that Merton wasn't really an academic, and he didn't publish the original paper. That he was part of the research, but his name wasn't on the paper, basically. Okay, good. So maybe, I don't know if it works like that, but yeah. Yes, that's right. Fisher Black did, and in fact, my boss's boss used to work with him at Goldman Sachs. So he was a hardworking. He's a real person. The reason I hope you like my pictures. Often you get these kind of presentations and people don't show you what these guys look like. I wanted to put pictures in of photographs of mathematicians to actually show you that these were real people. They weren't kind of robots or, I don't know, aliens or ephemeral beings who just like somehow got their names into academic. They were real people who were dealing with a real world problem. Okay. So here's the Black-Scholes equation. Now this is the most complicated slide in the whole presentation, and I don't want to spend too long on it because we've already spent 45 minutes and we're not even halfway through. I'll speed up, I promise. So this is the Black-Scholes PDE, a partial differential equation. If physicists are in the room, they'll recognize it as the heat equation, or a type of heat equation. And basically, what it does, it combines four terms together to give you the value of an option, which is V. T is time, sigma is vol, S is the spot price, and R is the risk-free rate. That is the rate that you would get if you put your money in a bank account or a government bond or something that's very, very, very safe. certainly not an option, which is unsafe. Now, quite rarely, these type of equations can't be solved analytically. But fortunately, this one can be solved analytically. It's quite difficult to do, but it's quite, on the other hand, it's quite straightforward once you know the steps. And what you get out of it are these closed form formulas. So if anybody asks you about the Black-Scholes equation, this is the Black-Scholes equation up here. That's the PDE. And these are the Black-Scholes formulas, which give you the closed form formulas for calls. And then you get many, many, many other types of formulas like this that come out of that PDE that give you the price of a call. Now, these days, the Black-Scholes is very much a dinosaur. In modern finance, people will say, well, our derivative is worth X, but because our advanced model tells us it's worth X. But what does that mean? Can we compare it with something? And the Black-Scholes formula is still used to compare derivatives to, so that you get a kind of a baseline. So although it's a dinosaur, it really isn't used very much now for pricing. I don't think traders would use it. Maybe they would in special circumstances. But it's useful as if you're developing a new model and you say, well, what would the Black-Scholes tell us? Well, the Black-Scholes would say this is worth 6.5, and our new model is saying 6.8. Well, that's great because our new model accounts for a little bit more risk, and we want the price to go up slightly. So that's the idea there. So unless anybody's got any questions on this, I mean, I can identify the various terms for you if you want. But unless anybody's got any questions, I'll just go on to the next slide. Okay. So we've looked at call options. I keep mentioning calls, and you must be bored to death of this idea of a call option. Call is the right to buy something in the future. The opposite is the right to sell, which is a put. But there's a whole range, there's a huge range of more exotic options. And these that I put up here are just some of them. I mean, you get barrier options, which are like the vanilla calls or whatever, but they only take effect when a barrier is breached. Or they may be the other way around, that they are in effect, and if the barrier is breached, that's it, they knock out. So-called knockout options, knock-ins and knockouts. So I put in a little example up there. And then we have best of and worst of options. That's where you have a basket of options, a basket of underlying, sorry, and the best performing one is the one that determines the payoff. And you have look-backs, which is basically where you reach maturity, and you look back over the lifetime of the underlying, and you say, well, the oil reached this maximum value of $200 3 months ago, so that's what determines the payoff. Or it might be the worst, the minimum price that the underlying achieved in the lifetime of the option. So that's a look back where you reach the end and you look back to see what happened during the option. Asians are averaging, so you average out the values of the underlying over the time. So sorry to keep going on about oil. Let's go on about something else. Microsoft shares. If we average Microsoft shares over 12 months, we might observe it 12 times, once at the end of each month, and at the end we say what's the average price there, and that would determine the price of your determine the payoff of your option. And then hybrids are basically derivatives that have features in more than one asset class. And by an asset class, I mean, I've been talking about energy because I work in commodities, so it's kind of naturally what comes to mind when I talk about these kind of things. But there's equities, there's interest rates, there's credit trading, and there's all these various areas of the market. So hybrids are things that straddle both areas. So you might have somebody who wants to monitor exposure to a commodity index, an agricultural index, but then have payments that are made in some kind of financial, some kind of foreign exchange deal. You know, there might be some kind of FX commodity deal going on there. That's just one example. There could be many others. There are many others. And then you get quantos and compos, which are basically quantos are where the deal is, the derivative is measuring something which is in one market but pays out in another. So, for example, you might have a derivative measuring something on the Dow Jones, and the payoff should be $100, let's say, but instead of $100, it's quantoed into yen. So instead of $100, you get 100 yen. And a compo is the same kind of idea, but instead of a conversion being 1-to-1, you do an FX exchange. So instead of getting $100, you get 100 worth of dollars in yen, which no, I'm not going to try and do that now because I've forgotten. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Does anybody have any kind of questions on? Is everybody kind of with this? I know the CQF guys have nodded their heads because this is tremendously boring so far. This is like Quant 101 stuff, really. This is just to give the programmers some flavour of what's going on. Okay. So here we go. Here's just to summarise what we've been talking about. Financial modelling is concerned with the pricing and the risk management of derivatives. So you all know what a derivative is now. You've got no excuse. And pricing is the job of computing a conservative yet competitive price for the derivative. A friend of mine works for UBS as a quant, and he says you always know when you got your price wrong because when the market opens in the morning, everybody goes, yeah, we'll have 10 of those. So if you underprice it and get it wrong, everybody will just rip you off and they'll buy loads of them. On the other hand, if you overprice, nobody will want to buy from you. So you've got to price competitively, and yet not so cheap that you're going to get ripped off, and your exposure will be far too high. So pricing is it's a tricky business. And then risk management is concerned with measuring the risk factors, such as the delta, which is it's measuring your sensitivity to changes in the prices of the underlying. For example, and you've got these other Greeks, and then you've got gamma, which is the second order, the second derivative of the option value with respect to the stock price. So gamma is measuring the non-linearity of the way that the option value varies as the stock price varies. That probably means nothing to some people, but I can draw it very simply, is that if you have your V, that's your option value, and your stock price here, and it looks like a straight line, then this then delta is the slope of this graph. So delta is going to be or it's actually dVds, is going to be a half or something. And your second derivative, d squared v by ds squared, is going to be 0. Another way of thinking about this is, another name for it is curvature or convexity. And it's basically a measure of the curviness of that. If your graph looks like this, and you're somewhere down here, and the current market price is there, then the curvature here is massive. And you need to be worried, because if it goes, well, in this case it's going to go either way, it's going to go up, but you need to be worried here because this is where things are changing most. So that's what kind of risk management does. Then you've got aggregation of all of that. So if you can imagine, you've got thousands of these derivatives. Then you've got to somehow aggregate all of that together, and that's aggregation is a risk function, and another risk function is VAR, which one of the gentlemen in the audience knows about. and VAR calculates your value at risk, and it takes in the numbers that are generated by quantitative code and does some stuff, and does more stuff on top of it than all the rest of it. And the other thing that quants do, financial modelers do, is to provide information for hedging strategy. Yes, another thing they do as well is work for rating agencies and come up with those AAA or BB- ratings as well. But not XXX, that's something different. Anyway, sorry, bad joke. A hedging strategy is basically telling traders what they need to do to hedge their positions. And it can be all sorts of strange things. It depends what the positions are. Okay, so hopefully I've defined a little bit about the history. I've told you what derivatives are. I've told you what exotic derivatives are. I told you about the mathematicians that have worked on the problem. And I've shown you some of the maths to give you a rough flavour of what's involved. But now it actually comes down to we can now answer the question, what is quant development? Well, quant development is implementing those models to generate those prices. That is what quant development is. It's working with the quant analysts, I'll talk about that in a minute, to actually implement in software programs that will, the algorithms that will generate these fair prices and the risk measures and the hedging strategies and whatever else. That is what quant developers do. Does everybody got that? I hope so. Okay. So what we do, there are basically, I've stuck interpolation down there. It probably doesn't belong on this slide, but anyway, let's talk about the common solutions that we can apply to this problem of pricing derivatives. The first one is closed form solutions. Now these are very rare. They only really exist for really simple instruments like barriers, calls, puts. Barriers are actually quite exotic, but there are some closed form solutions for it. When you get a closed form solution, it comes out of a lot of hard maths, but it's very, very valuable because it gives you a way of calibrating and measuring up your other more advanced derivatives, your more exotic derivatives. Monte Carlo, which is basically the JCB of the quant world. The Monte Carlo will value anything. Monte Carlo is very, very simple. All you do with Monte Carlo, you simulate the lifetime of the option, come up with a payoff, and then you do that thousands, hundreds of thousands of times and take the average. And you simulate it by using random numbers and saying, right, well, the random numbers we used, but the randomness has to match up with the market. So those graphs that I showed you before, they have to, the random numbers that you're choosing have to be calibrated to that kind of randomness. So if we go back, I don't know how long it's going to take me to go back, but you can remember what those graphs look like. Basically, I've got to make sure that the random numbers I'm drawing, I have to kind of multiply them and manipulate them a bit, but they have to, that path has to have the same statistical properties as the market that I'm measuring. Because if it doesn't, then I'm not going to get prices that are similar. A question? Absolutely. The claim period is, you're talking about the lifetime of the option. The claim period, yeah. Oh, against historic data. Yeah, that's a very important part of it too. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how you would. That's one of the ways that you would ensure that your diffusion process, that your model actually was, that part of your model that dealt with the random part was actually in agreement with market data. Yeah, definitely. You look at this, what's called the historical volatility, or you look at the historical mean, and and all the other statistical parameters to do with that distribution. Well, no, as far as what's happened with the price of some underlying, you can't. That hasn't got a range of possibilities. There's only one price path for that thing. So if you look at the price of oil, sorry to keep using oil. You look at the price of oil, and the price of the front month forward contract for oil, WTI oil, Western Texas Intermediate oil, on the 23rd of May 2007 was a particular price. It was $57 or something around that mark. You know, history we can't change that. That was the price. Does that answer your question? Well, there's almost certainly more than one way to do this. So this is what I'm doing here is just giving you a rough outline. I'm not presenting a kind of a definitive way of doing it. But yeah, I mean, generally when people try and think about sensible parameters to put into their model, they will use historical prices to calibrate them with. But they may alter them though slightly. They may say, well, we need to be hedged more in here, and we'll adjust them. And calibration is often looked after by traders. They want to calibrate their own models. If they're not happy with the prices, they'll tweak them slightly. So yeah, Monte Carlo will basically price any derivative at all. It's the real JCB. But the trouble is, you've got to do the Monte Carlo about 1 million times to be really, really sure that you've got no more variance and it's not going to, the price isn't going to jump around, to be really sure that you've simulated it properly. Often you can get away with a lot less simulations, and there are ways to actually speed that up. But basically, you need to do it. You still need to do it a lot of times. A better way to do it, if you can, is something called finite difference. And if anybody works in the games industry or something like that, this may sort of strike some chord with you. Basically, what you do, you lay a grid on your problem, and then you work back from what you know to what you don't know. So, and the finite difference bit is basically it's doing calculus, but on a finite scale as opposed to an infinitesimal scale. Unfortunately, with finite difference, it begins to break down when you go above maybe 3 or 4 dimensions. So if you've got a basket of underlyings, you've got an option on the basket, or basket option, I should say. Sorry. Then the dimensionality of that problem would be the number of assets. So if you had 10 assets, there's no way you could use finite difference. So finite difference is quite limited with what it can do, but it's very nice for some particular derivatives, like barriers. Barriers are pretty good with finite difference. And then another one is interpolation, but this isn't used very much. But you can pretty much see how that works. You can say, well, I know that this is worth so-and-so, and this is worth so-and-so, and I can interpolate between the two. This is more of a kind of an internal technique. You wouldn't really use this to price an overall derivative. But it's used sort of internally in models a lot to actually interpolate between one value and another. That's why it doesn't really belong in on this slide in a way, because it's not an overall pricing strategy, really. Any questions? Good. Let's move on. So technologies. C++ is the most common language. C++ has a stranglehold, as it were, on, careful choice of words here. It has a stranglehold on the quant dev arena, and a lot of people don't like it. I've heard that it has a less of it has a weakening influence in America. People are moving over to things like C# and Java much more rapidly than they are in the UK. In the UK, very much still people are very, very traditional, sticking with what they've got and what they know works. And I've got a slide in a moment to say why I think that's a good thing. And Python is also used very heavily, particularly for things like payoffs, which we'll see in a moment. Not in Python though, and other types of scripting things that need to go on, perhaps processing of market data, calculation of statistical parameters. You could easily see somebody writing a calibration framework in Python or some sort of correlation thing in Python. And then we've got, let's talk about those two in a second. Then we've got Excel and Excel VBA. These are basically, if you're working as a quant developer or a quant, it's kind of assumed that you know what you're doing with Excel, and you can just get by with VBA as well. They're just sort of universal tools, really, and they are used to prototype models sometimes. Pretty simple models. They're mainly used to sort of organize data and draw some graphs and things like that. And then these two in the middle are probably the more interesting ones. There's a tool called MATLAB, which is a bit like Mathematica, but it's probably more numerical than Mathematica. Mathematica is quite, it deals with symbolic stuff more better than MATLAB. MATLAB's very numerical. But what MATLAB can do is that it can take your model and it can output C++. This C++ needs a runtime library, the MATLAB runtime library. So you need these two things together for it to work. Sorry about my tremendously bad handwriting, by the way. I hope everybody can read that. That means runtime library. There's another product called SciFinance, which I think has probably a bit more scope. And that you can describe some sort of, you can describe your whole model, and it outputs C++. But it doesn't need any runtime library. It's self-contained code. It's quite human readable, whereas the code in here is not human readable. Not human readable. Sorry, if there's anybody working at MATLAB or whatever, I apologize, but that's my experience. I think I'm allowed to say this. And this is human readable. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in the next slide. Okay. So there you go. Why C++? I was recently asked this by Dr. Riaz Ahmad, who works here. He's one of the mathematicians, and he's deeply into C++. He likes his C++. And he asked me why people are continuing to use C++. And I came up with 4 reasons. The first reason is that you've got complete control over the processor and the processing environment. Well, almost complete control. For a lot of requirements, this isn't necessary, okay? But in a lot of other environments, it is necessary. It only really matters if you have some time-critical processing to handle. For instance, FX spot trading, prices have to be updated within a blink. And a blink is defined as 1/5 of a second. So trader punches in a number to price something, and that has to go, also that 1/5 of a second has to account for network time as well. So you've got 1/5 of a second to maybe produce a number and get it across the network. And it's situations like that. That's why C++ has the edge here, because if you need to, you can just drop down to assembler and do some really nasty stuff and get it done quickly. Another reason is you've got infinite flexibility with design choices. So you've got object orientation and templates. And pretty much with those two, as I'm sure some of these guys will know in the audience, you can pretty much do whatever you like within reason. You can also get yourself in a horrid mess as well, which is one of the reasons that people don't like C++. It's also difficult to learn. But if you master it, and you produce good code, it's very, 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 very powerful. Another reason is that there's a lot of mathematical libraries out there that use C++. A couple of examples I put up there. One is MKL, which is made by Intel, and another one called IMSL, which is another math library. And then finally, some people want to understand every line of their code. And in a way, this is a reasonable request. If you've got a bank who's trading billions of dollars or pounds or yen in derivatives, they want to know how those models work. And if they don't work for some reason, they've got to be able to fix them and go in and debug them. If it's a kind of a black box approach, and you've got this software called MATLAB or SciFinance, and you put in this high-level thing and you've pressed go and it's produced this code for you, and it works one day and then 3 weeks later it doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't work because somebody's published a volatility curve that has negative numbers in it or something. Then you've got to be able to debug that. You've got to be able to step through the code and actually see where it's going wrong. This could be very, very challenging with products that just output code. So those are my reasons for why I think C++ still has a lot to go in it. It probably isn't the ideal language to do quant development in, but I don't think there's a better one. It might be a task for the future to build a better language. So speeding up, because we've still got lots of slides. Here's a little bit of SciFinance, even though I've just said it's no good. I didn't say it's no good. I think it's a very good product, and it will have its uses. Basically, what we're doing here, we're setting up a PDE with Crank Nicholson, which is some kind of finite difference scheme. We're defining our region. What else are we doing? Yeah, we're setting some coordinate stuff. We're simulating some spot with some basic math function, hyperbolic sine. We're setting up some Black-Scholes. And you can see, then this is the payoff. And we say, well, the payoff, if it's a call, then it's max of S minus K and 0. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll recognize that. Otherwise, if it's not a call, it's going to be a put. So we're going to do max of K minus S, which is the other way around. And then we've set these boundary conditions and do this stuff and do some more stuff with vectors. And basically what you do, you load this up, press a button, and it outputs some C code, and then you can run it. You can run it with your project, and it will price this call for you. It's not a vanilla call. I think this is a call with early exercise with Americans. I haven't talked about that, but there's not enough time. So anyway, carry on. Right. Now then, patterns. This slide is really more of a placeholder for some more slides. A couple of reasons for that is, one is I'm not a pattern freak, although there's some, hands up who knows a lot about patterns. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right, it's 8. So we'll all get together in the pub and you can educate me. Great, I should come along and listen. That's one reason. I know the basic patterns, and I've read most of Gamma's book. By the way, people who don't know what patterns are something that was borrowed from architecture. And I think it was back in the 50s, and people said, right, well, what are the basic sort of design things when it comes to architecture? Well, we've got this thing called a door, and we've got this thing, someone coming in and an entranceway and all this kind of thing. And it's identifying common themes and patterns in your architecture, and then this has been taken by the computer science gurus to actually identify common things. You may be developing software for completely different problem domains. You might be drilling for oil. Sorry about oil. I keep mentioning oil. Forget oil. You might be writing software for scanning, imaging, medical imaging, or something. But the same kind of design patterns, the software patterns, will be inside those software. I can't really talk too much about this because it would take too much time. But basically, for people who know what patterns are, then we can talk a little bit about about those. So there are 4 basic areas that you need to separate out in quantitative development. There's the underlying, which we talked about, which is Microsoft shares, for example. There's the payoff, which is that max minus S, max of S minus K and 0. There's the process, which could be finite difference or Monte Carlo. And then there's the integration, which is basically aggregating the results at the end and then coming up with an answer. So basically, these are the kind of patterns that I've been reading about that I think are worth thinking about when looking at these areas. And the composite pattern is basically the idea of composing objects together. Now, if I do say anything that's a clanger here with patterns, do forgive me. So with an underlying, very often you've got to compose things together, and a classic example is the basket. So if I've got a basket of options, let's say I've got Microsoft, IBM, and 3M or something in there, then I've got to have a composite which represents those 3. And then similarly, these other patterns can be applied to these four basic areas that keep cropping up in quant development. So unless anybody's got any kind of questions on that, I'm going to kind of move on really. The 3 books that you should read are these 3 books on this subject. The classic work is Design Patterns by Gamma and 4 other guys or 3 other guys. There's another book called Process Patterns by Martin Fowler. In particular, there's 2 or 3 chapters. There's one on measurement, another one on trade, and there is actually one on derivatives as well, which I only learned today because I haven't fully read it yet. So this is how honest I am. And there is another book called Design Patterns and Derivative Pricing, and there's a bit dropped off this slide because it came from PowerPoint 2007, but there's derivative pricing in C++. And Mark Josh's a clever guy, but unfortunately I don't think he's a pattern freak either. And this book, you would think, right, well this is what we want. We want patterns for quantitative development. This is it. But unfortunately it's not really. It's all about how to design code well and how to use C++. It's not really about patterns. He doesn't really talk about them. He mentions a few here and there. But he doesn't have any diagrams, or he doesn't say, well, he doesn't really mention Gamma's design patterns or make reference to those. The problem with the middle book, so that's the problem with Mark Josh's book. The problem with Martin Fowler's book is that he has his own pattern language. He doesn't really make reference to Gamma's patterns at all, I don't think. So you're kind of, and the whole pattern world is dominated by Gamma's language. So those are the problems when it comes to applying patterns to quantitative development. And I believe that if anybody's here in this room who knows about quant development and who knows about patterns, then go ahead and write a book about it, because I'm sure it would sell. I'd certainly buy it anyway. Okay. So there's loads of stuff I need to talk about. So time is getting on. I don't know what time people want to go, but 8. So I'm 20 minutes overdue already. So let me see if I can get this done in 10 minutes, quarter of an hour. Okay. So the types of programming we do are there. The numerical, obviously, that's the first one. We're dealing with maths. It's going to be numerical. Wrappers and interfaces, you know, getting data around, writing, encapsulating other classes, this kind of thing. Unit and regression tests are a big part of what we do. We've got to make sure that, you know, things work as they should. Working with libraries, that is evaluating new libraries, taking existing libraries, maybe writing wrappers for certain library functions, that kind of thing. And then logging database and architectural. You kind of get sucked into that kind of thing as well. Okay. And then numerical methods is the most important thing. And I put up 4 books that probably should be on every quant developer's desk. The top one is Numerical Recipes in C++, which is it has some problems with it, but it's a unique book. There is no other book that has more numerical recipes in it than that book there. It is the book to get if you're interested in this stuff, and I've used it many times. Another one is Introduction to Numerical Methods in C++. There's another book that was recommended to me by David van der Vood, who's a very clever guy. And that's called Scientific Engineering C++, and that's by a gentleman called Nachman. And then there's a paper, you have to Google for this one, it's called What Every Computer Scientist Should Know About Floating Point Arithmetic. To be honest, it goes into way too much depth than what most people really need to know, but anyway, it is useful. Now this is an interesting slide, a bit of colour to wake you up. Basically what we've got in the quant world is we've got a whole continuum of people working in there. And the very far end we've got the quant research, and those will include people who, professors and so forth, who haven't even walked into a bank ever, or any other financial institution. And then we've got the mathematical modelers, and those are the guys I talked about that take the research papers and actually produce working mathematical models that can actually work properly. And then you've got the quant developers who are a bit like me, or who are like me, and they actually implement the models and write the code. And sometimes the mathematical modelers will do a lot of the coding themselves. In fact, my boss writes a lot of code, and my boss's boss, global head of commodity quants, he writes an awful lot of code. So, you know, and he's an old C hacker. So, you know, sorry? Oh, I don't know. I can't possibly say. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the quant tech guys who kind of, you know, maybe keep machines running, install new software, manage your framework, manage your CVS repository or whatever, that kind of thing. And there's a whole continuum really, and in a lot of organizations, these kind of skills and responsibilities blend into one another. On the other hand, some institutions put walls between these type of responsibilities, and it just depends where you go. I can't really mention names, but I will in the pub if you want. But yeah, I mean, you could find yourself working. You know, you want to get into this stuff, and you could find yourself on the far right of this, just sort of installing libraries or something. You know, it's a difficult field in some ways, and it's a sliding scale. The ideal is a sort of well, it depends on the individual, but the ideal is that you're kind of free to do a bit of everything, really. I think, anyway. Depends what people want. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through a product lifestyle. Product life cycle. We've got the lifestyle to come up. So the first thing is a trader comes to me and says, I need you to implement cliquet options for me. A cliquet is a French word for a rattle, you know, like a football rattle. It just means that there's some kind of ratchet effect. Now, if you're unlucky, that is your brief. You won't get anything more. If you're lucky, you'll get a term sheet, and I'll show you a term sheet in a minute. So the first thing to do is to check that we've got a model suitable for cliquet options. We may not have a model. You know, we've got a Monte Carlo framework, we've got a PDE framework, finite difference framework, but these two may not be appropriate. They won't work in the right way for those type of cliquets or something like that. There might be some effects to do with that aren't captured in the model. There might be some implicit risks that aren't captured in the mathematical model. So we need to check that first. And then we basically check the model, we design the interface, and we write the payoff in unambiguous English and mathematics. And I can show you that in a moment in the term sheet. And basically then we go back to the trader and say, right, this is what we're going to do, this is the model choice, and this is the payoff. Are you happy with that? And they say yes, and then you do it, and then 3 days later they say, no, I want to do something else. That's when you come in with your agile stuff, right? Okay. So finally, we now write the code. We compare special cases with closed-form solutions. What this means is, with a clique option, how would you do that? I don't want to get into that. With other types of things, let's say barriers, you've got closed-form formulas for barriers, but they may not match up with what you've got because they may be, you might be doing a discrete barrier, but the model gives you, the closed-form solution gives you a continuous barrier. So you can make some adjustments and get some sort of agreement. The idea here is that you're trying to kind of see if your numbers are reasonable. You're generating some prices, but are they reasonable prices? You know, they may be completely wrong. They may be twice the amount they should be. But if you've got some way of comparing it with like Black-Scholes or some other type of closed form, then you've got a chance that it's right, basically. And then you write your unit and regression tests to make sure it's not going to fall over in the future. And then finally, you submit it for review to trading, model review, and risk. And everybody's happy, and it goes into production. And that's it. So here we go. You can do this probably in 2 or 3 minutes. This looks like a complicated formula, but it isn't. This is what the trader might give you. He might say, right, I need you to implement this for me. So this basically says, we've got a trade date. It starts on the 31st of January. It lasts for 5 years. And what's happening is at the end of each year, we observe the price of this index. So this is SI minus 1 over SI. So this is the price at the end of 1 year minus the price of the previous year divided by the price at the previous year. So let's say the price has gone up to 120 and it was 100. So it's 120 minus 100, which is 20 over 100, which is 20 over 100, which is a fifth. So it's increased by 20%. So what we would do, we would say the minimum of the cap and 20%. The cap in this case is 8%. So the minimum of 8 and 20 is 8. So these performances are capped at 8%. So you're never going to get 8% more out of this payoff. Okay, so that's the performance cap. And then what you do, we say max of 0 and whatever came out of this, which was, in this case, 8%. So in other words, you're never going to get less than 0, because 0 and if this was negative, because the performance can be negative, of course, then this would be max of 0 and minus 3, which would be 0. So in other words, your performance could be jumping around like this, but it's always capped at 0 and 8%. So you're always going to get 0 and 8% out of this. And then finally, at the end, what you do, you say and you sum those up between I and 5. I hope everybody can read that. That's what that says. That's I and 5. So those are the 5 years, the 5 observations. And then what you finally do is you say the max of all of that, this max applies to this figure here. So it's the max of all of this sum and 16.25%. So your let's say this thing came out to 50%, and the max of that would be 50%. If this thing came out as a 0, you got nothing out of this basket stock price that you thought was going to go up, and it's done nothing. Then, well, at least you've got 16%, because max of 0 and 16% is 16%. So that's the way the clique works, roughly. Okay. Any questions? Good? Right. So what we do, I go away and I write that. Now basically I've got some kind of base class here, which probably inherits from something else, and it's probably got a lot more in it. But basically the key point is that we've got a virtual double eval function in here, which basically means that we're going to evaluate the payoff. And it's virtual because this is an abstract base class. This is the real payoff here that we're going to be passing around. The idea here is that this is a kind of a bridge type pattern where we basically have a thing that can be passed around to, we can pass in one of these to, and lots of other types of payoffs to common code. So here I've got all my variables coming in when I construct it. I've got some way of setting the index values. These could come in as something to the eval function. I've just chosen to put this. By the way, I've never actually compiled this code, so if you spot an error in it, I'm sorry. I can't show you real code because it's proprietary. I can show you a little bit of real code in a minute, but that's something else for a project. So anyway, this one, so basically what we do, we're returning a double, which is the price, and we say eval. And what eval does is that it starts off by saying it's 0. We go over the observations. We say the uncapped performance is the index values, the ith index value minus the previous one, and we started at 1, minus 1. Now if you think why it's minus 1, well, it's because we just divided this by S. We simplified that. That is Si over Si minus 1 minus 1. Yeah, okay. Sorry if I'm going a bit fast, but I know some people are getting thirsty here. Right. So then what we now do, we've got the uncapped performance, so we now need to cap it. So we say, well, that's the performance, the actual performance is now the minimum of the perf cap, which is 8% in this case, and the uncapped performance, which we just computed. And then we finally say, add to the payoff the maximum of that performance and the perf floor, which in this case is 0. So we're always going to get between 0 and 8%. And we add that to the payoff. We go around that loop, the number of observations, which in this case was 5. So by the time we come out of this loop, we've got the payoff, which is whatever it is, and we've got this global floor, which was 16.25%. So we return the max of the payoff and 16.25%. And then all of this is typical. This is some kind of lookup to a discount factor, because what we're dealing with here is the future value of the payoff. But of course, we need to put it into present value terms. If I said to you if I got £1 in my wallet, it's not going to be worth £1 in a year's time. Well, it would be if it sat there, but if I put it in a bank account, it's going to grow. And the reverse of that is you need to effectively reduce the amount slightly. So that's what that's doing. And what I need to do, I need to look up the discount from the yield curve. So I pass in the currency that the payment is in into the yield curve thing, which belongs in static data somewhere. I haven't declared this. This is just somewhere. Don't worry about it. And then I ask for the discount factor for that particular maturity. And that will give me a number, which will be like 0.9 or whatever, something. It'll be something like that. It will reduce this amount slightly. It will present value that amount. And then I multiply it by the notional, and I'm done. And I just return that. And that is a payoff. And that's, realistically, that's, with testing, with unit testing, whatever, that's probably, realistically, a day's work. Realistically, because you've got to get it right, you've got to test it, you've got to be absolutely right. I could knock out that in 10 minutes, but it's absolutely right. It's getting all the bits and pieces around it, it's taking it back to people, taking the results back to people to get them to agree that it's okay and all the rest of it. So there's quite a lot of work involved. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. I mean, yeah. I mean, I can't talk about how Merrill Lynch have things set up because it's proprietary. But typically what happens is there's some kind of library management system whereby what you write here will go into a library and it will become available to the traders, and it will become available to the risk and the back office functions who also need to price this stuff as well. Sorry, could you speak up a little bit? That's a very good question. The question is whether this is something that can be run under Monte Carlo or finite difference. The answer is it could be either. Because if you think about it, all this function does, this tells you what the present value is of, in fact, this discounting probably should be done outside the payoff. I put this in to sort of give me something a bit more to talk about here, but in real terms, probably this would be outside. So the payoff just gives you what the option does at expiry, given its inputs. So it could be used in a finite difference scheme as well. Good question. Anything else? Okay. We're getting there. This is just some code I wrote in my CQF project. This is actually a snippet of finite difference code. What are we doing for time? We'll skip that. Where do quants work? That's where they work. Banks, hedge funds, rating agencies, and other financial institutions. The lifestyle, typically long hours, 50 to 60 hour weeks as a kind of a minimum. I mean, some people work crazy hours. I probably work around 60 hours a week. I have worked more, 70, maybe 80 hours some weeks, but generally try and take it easy with about 60 hours. High earnings, I'm not allowed to tell you, obviously, what people earn or how much I earn or whatever, but I've heard it said that there's no quant in London that earns more than £500,000 a year. The bottom of the scale, I'm not sure. It's difficult to say, really. Generally high earnings. You can use your imagination. I don't want to put figures on it because people would only think. Sorry, yeah, we're running out of time. Good. Right. Very importantly, people who work closely with traders generally earn more. So if you sit next to the traders, they will really appreciate you. And when they get, their £4 million bonus, instead of buying a Ferrari, they might say, well, we'll give him a bit more, give him a few pennies because he's done really well this year. That's generally the way the city works. Is the earnings in the city are generally driven by traders, and all those people around them then kind of there's an effect there. It's high pressure, and it's mathematical modelling and software development to high specification and tight deadlines. That's roughly what it is, and we're nearly there. You'd be pleased to know this is almost the last slide. So I've presented this from just an introductory point of view, and there'll be some people who are here who are just interested in go away and do nothing ever about it. But it's a very good source of employment. So if people are interested, I know the CQF people are interested in it, obviously. But this is more; these comments are more addressed to the ACCU members, really. If you are interested in it, then these are the things that you can do. There's a CQF program which is run by Seven City here in this building, and it's led by a mathematician called Paul Wilmot, who's quite famous, and he's written some really, really good books. One is called Paul Wilmot Introduces Quantitative Finance, which is very, very readable, just as readable as my talk today, or not readable, listenable. And yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a short course. It's very, very intensive. It's very rewarding, though. It's very practical. Paul was a quant with Goldman Sachs, I believe, for a number of years, so he really knows what it means. Whereas some people in the academic world really don't know what it really means to produce a proper working model. Some of them just know how to produce a price for something, which may not be enough. And then there are master's programs. There's lots of those, but they're typically a lot of them are more expensive, and they take 2 years, whereas the CQF takes 6 months. Or there's some master's programs you can do in a year, but normally they're full-time. And then there's 3 books that are very, very good. There's Paul Wilmot Introduces Quantitative Finance. There's John C. Hull, Options, Futures and Other Derivatives. This is a bit like the Bible of derivatives. A lot of people have this book. It's pretty good, and it was very good. And then if you've got a mathematical bias, I highly recommend Stephen Shreve's books, Stochastic Calculus Volume 1 and 2. Volume 1 is analysing the quant problems in discrete space, and then Volume 2 is the continuous one. and I've nearly got to the end of volume 1, and I'm just about to go into volume 2, which is a lot harder. Anyway, and the other advice I can give you is get closer to the products where you work and try and understand them in more depth. So a lot of people want to get into quant development, but they find it hard to sort of make that transition, and it's probably best to just try and get there slowly, really, and understand more about stuff where you work, and maybe transition into a front office role as opposed to a back office role. Front office roles you're typically working a lot more with products, that kind of thing. Okay, so the final slide. This is a little slide to give anybody who's actually going for interviews or will be going to interviews some help. Paul and Dominic, as in Paul Wilmot and Dominic O'Connor. Now, Dominic O'Connor is an ACCU member, I understand. I keep trying to get him to come here and do a talk and whatever. So, but he's keen, so he will do something. But they've written a guide to quantitative interviews because Dominic O'Connor was a quant developer for a long time, and he's now more of a recruitment agent. But they've written a guide which is about 40 pages, and it's packed full of good advice. There's another book called Heard on the Street by Timothy Crack, which is just full of sort of quant questions and answers that you normally get in interviews. And then you should really brush up on those things like basic probability, maths like calculus, Taylor series, Newton-Raphson, and then basic finance like forwards, arbitrage, payoff graphs for vanilla options. Well, you've seen one of those tonight. That was a call. You could draw that. It's amazing how many times you get asked to draw the call graph. It's a phenomenal thing. And barrier options, put call parity, risk neutral, forward pricing formula. And we haven't talked about a lot of those stuff because I've already taken way too much time and have bored everybody to death here. Brain teasers are a big thing in quant interviews. Really, really big thing. There's a forum on Paul Wilmot's site which has nothing but brain teasers in it. There's about 600 or 700 brain teasers in there. And if you were to memorize all of those, then you'd be very, very well equipped at these interviews. And then, of course, C++. That's it. That's the end. Sorry to take so long.